Before I dive into things here, a couple of quick things I want to talk about before we get started. First off, again, like I just mentioned a moment ago, but I'm saying this for anybody who is watching this recording. If you were absent on Tuesday, I would go back and watch that video. It's kind of a long one, but that's because I went over a ton of material on Tuesday. Most of it being very new to most of you, so I'd go and watch it. If you haven't yet, I might even suggest that it would be a good time to do that in class so that you're not confused and left behind. Second thing I want to talk about is homework. I've got some suspicions. And I'm talking in general. By no means do I think this is the case for every single person. But in general, both of the last two homework assignments, grade-wise, have been a bit disappointing. And I have a couple of theories that I think are coming into play. In the homework assignments in general, and then one specific thing that I imagine happened in this most recent one. I get a very strong suspicion that we're waiting until like the last minute to try to do the homework, when either you don't have enough time to do it efficiently, or you have given yourself enough days to forget what you got from the class. I get a suspicion that that's what's happening. We're waiting until either like the night before, or at some point where you just don't have the kind of time that you need to either get the work done. Because consider, you're in class, you get maybe 40 minutes of drawing done in class, and that's to accomplish a small still life of a few objects. If you're working on an entire room, you're needing more time than that. And so I get the feeling that some of you are waiting around and just are either not giving yourself enough time, so you've just got a very short amount of time, or you have waited so long, like your class ended on Thursday morning, and you've done nothing, not even in a sketchbook, until Monday night. So you've had all that time to forget what you learned. And then you're sitting down trying to bang it out without someone who's there to help you out. Probably at such a late hour that you're like, well, I can't email Jason to ask about this because it's 1:30 a.m. and this is due at 9:30 today, right? Then when it comes to the 2-point perspective interior, I get a very strong suspicion that many of us did not go and watch that video that I gave you guys, which I get was, like I said, it was 25 minutes, I know, but it was laying out exactly how to do that assignment. And there were a lot of them, enough that I'm pausing at the beginning of class to talk about it, where I know that you know how it works because I watch you guys in the classroom, and I don't see anybody struggling to the extent that you guys were struggling with this homework. So that it feels like either one, the other, or both things happen. You waited until you didn't have enough time, or you had forgotten how things were done, and or you didn't watch that video that walked you through it. All of these that I'm giving back to you right now were considered on time. Nobody turned that assignment in late. I'm pretty sure everybody turned in the 1-point perspective drawing on time as well. That being the case, you get it back and you're not happy with the grade, there'll be comments written on the back. Rework the drawing and address those issues. It will most likely mean getting a new piece of paper out and doing the drawing again. We'll get to some drawings later in the semester where you might be able to just address it by drawing right on top of the drawing that's there. But in a lot of cases, the problem is you're not using your vanishing points at all. Like at all. You've got lines going in all kinds of crazy directions. You're not really going to be able to fix that by drawing on top of it. So it's probably going to mean taking out another piece of paper and trying again, right? But you turn that in and it earns a better grade. That grade will replace the one that you've got right now. Because I always put that option out there. If you've turned anything in on time, it is always eligible to be reworked and turned in again for a better grade. All right? So whatever is the case, whatever is causing the breakdown, whether it be waiting until the last minute or not giving yourself enough time, work on that. If it's a time issue, maybe do these things in a couple of sittings. Right? Get started at one point and then be like, all right, I have to go eat or I have to go to sleep or whatever. And the next day, set aside some more time and sit down and knock it out. If it's a thing that you're waiting until like the day before class, maybe pick a time that's a little sooner while everything's still fresh in your mind. Or practice a little bit in the sketchbook before you dive into the homework, because the sketchbook is a place where it's okay to screw up and make mistakes, because that's the place where you're practicing and testing yourself. The homework is meant to showcase that you've got it. It shouldn't be the testing ground. And yeah, if the issue on that 2-point perspective drawing was you didn't watch the video, so you got confused as to where lines should go because of that, go watch that video before you rework it. Okay. So, quickly again, we talked last week. I've still got everything up on that board over there should you need to look and remind yourself of anything. We're working in planar analysis, which is a method of taking these three-dimensional objects that we're looking at and portraying the surfaces of those objects using a series of flat two-dimensional planes that have foreshortening in such a way as to suggest the way those surfaces exist in three-dimensional space. Like these planes that give us the sense of this portion of this lamp being round. Or these planes that sort of give us the indication of this bowl sort of dipping inward and then back around down into the bottom. Or the planes going around the bottle that give us the sense of it being round, but then this part tapering in and then coming upward again into another cylinder. This person thinking about all the different ways that this hat is punched in and folded and thinking about how those planes would go in different directions. All right? And most of you were still in step 1, or maybe you were starting to move into step 2. But I'm going to remind you guys, remember that step 1, you have your 2B out, and you're just very lightly and very sketchy blocking in your composition, right? Let me see if I can find, yeah. Since this student didn't get finished, you can sort of see some of their initial drawing under here where they were just making quick marks. There was another one I remember that isn't finished. Yeah. So you can sort of see these very quick gestural marks. Not worrying about line quality. Things are scratchy and going all over the place. Just blocking in the composition. If you're thinking about anything that you need to be careful about, it's proportions, perspective, your placement, things of that nature. All right, getting your entire composition. At some point, this entire composition looked like that light bulb up there looks right now. Right, the whole thing looked that way. Then step 2, which some of you had gotten into step 2, grabbing your 4B and your ruler and just going around your contours. All right, we use the 4B so that the lines around the outside can be a bit darker than the ones on the inside to help contain all that madness of all that activity that's happening on the page. Then you would go around all of your objects in that way. The student probably should have done that with the light bulb and all this back here, but I use this one specifically because I can show you what the drawing looked like at one point. And then, after going around all of the contours of all your objects, going back to your 2B for step 3 and your ruler, and thinking about how to break up the interior of these objects into a series of planes. All right. Again, if you weren't here on Tuesday, I would watch that video so that you get a feel for how that's done. And then lastly, fourth step, after you have broken down all your objects into planes, bringing in your 6B, maybe even your 4B again, and your ruler, and thinking about line variation. Where should we push lines darker? Where do we want to keep our lines thin and crisp? Where do we maybe even get the eraser out and erase lines down because we want them even thinner than they are? Then at the end of class, I mentioned that I would talk to you about fabric today. So when it comes to fabric, particularly the fabrics that we have out here, nothing out there is particularly thick, like, I don't know, like a quilt or a comforter. Everything's really thin and wispy. And so if you take really thin and wispy fabric and try to break it up into a lot of planes, it ends up looking really solid, like all your objects end up looking very solid. And so it doesn't give a good indication of that real thin, waif-like texture of the fabric. Now, here's a student where what they did have was a quilt. There was a quilt that was like on this table. So it made sense to sort of break it up into planes. And you can see as a result how much more solid this looks. It doesn't look really thin and wispy. Versus here, and this is the kind of thing I'm going to want you to think about more when it comes to fabric, is just putting down some lines with your ruler that just sort of map out where you see wrinkles in the fabric. Those will naturally create planes. All right, so like this student's just making lines that demark where they see wrinkles in the fabric. This student as well. Again, just using a ruler. Like you can still see some underlying marks that they never got around to. But the ones that they did put in, they just put in with a ruler and are just following folds that they see in the fabric. Right? It creates a sense of there being planes while also giving a sense that this fabric is so thin and wispy and not a hard, solid object like the ones that are sitting on top of it. I think this student here. All right, and like this student, when you see a line in the fabric that then eventually the wrinkle or the fold flattens out, lift the pencil up so that those lines sort of drag and trail and become thinner. All right? That's the approach I want you to think about when it comes to fabric. Unless there's something like a really thick quilt, which right now there's not out there. Right? In that case, I would understand making some planes. All right, so you guys get back to your drawings.